Your main man returns with another installment of Monster Ecology within the Ring of Fire! Saga book is the book we're going to be drawing this species from. Now, if you've looked at the title above, you already know what we're talking about. We're talking about the most vile, reprehensible monsters to exist in all of the world. Their name, human. Humans in Kvegathale appear just before you get involved with the game. Only briefly before Cycle 5000. Gods and other divinities create their own species at any time they please. It's not a process of evolution. It's a process of divine will. There are species that are impossibly old, dating back long before the creation of the cycles, long before the coming of the thrones of divinity. And then there are the humans. They are the new kids in the game. Imagine what me and you and all the rest of us would do if we appeared and there were less than 1,000 of us and we had no land to call our own, for all land was claimed by other species who had weapons of copper or iron or even steel. And we are standing around the world, scattered to many different places. What would you do? What would I do? What would we all do? What would our history lead us to think we would do? What if we were created by a god of adaptability, of city creation, of conquest, of empire building, of masculinity? What if that was a god that made us in his image, and his name was Pelgan? What would we do? What would we do if we had no place that was our own? And we were commanded to have children. Many, many children. To have empires that would come, yet no place to put them. What would we do? What would you do? Oh, before you get in any sort of philosophical, falutin, liberal sort of ideology, let's be real for a second. Somebody's got to go so you can have yours. You got to get yours before you can have any sort of ideas of anything else. The instinct to provide for your children, for yourself, for your family is so strong a drive. It creates ruthlessness in a species that is adaptable, a species that can lie, a species that can conquer and build cities and statues and walls and build with stone and wood and cleanse with fire. Humans are the pinnacle of adapting to any and all environments. And when created by Pelgan, they were scattered across all of Kvegathale. Upon each continent, upon islands, humans appeared. A species since the coming of the thrones of divinity, at the time of the beginning of the cycles. A time 5,000 cycles ago. Now a cycle is 77 days. That is the calendar. That is the calendar according to the Thraxu, who is law, who is the forger of thrones, and one must sit upon such a throne to be considered divinity. And to each divinity there is a day, and unto that day the divinity has much control and strength. And knowing the strength and control of those divinities upon those days, Pelgan invested his children, the most recent sapient species created, a species by the telling of years is about 96 years old at the start of the game. Humans are so new, there are many species around Kvegathale that have not seen them. At least many peoples in those species. They will look at you and go, what are you? This is not Forgotten Realms. These are realms you will always remember. Humans are not dominant. They are a new occurrence. Still, that drive, that violent drive, that barbaric instinct that we possess inside ourselves, still to this day, regardless of how humane you think you are. It is that drive that the first humans set out upon to make conquest in the world through trickery, through tactics, and through brutality. And the stories of many of these humans, of the progenitors of their lines, are told right here in the saga book, as we see the setups of the history of the geography of the world. The humans themselves represent not only every type of human you might imagine on Earth, but types you would not imagine. Some of these are very, very rare, and, well, perhaps the look of them would not continue for thousands of cycles into the future. Or perhaps they will. Perhaps they will themselves become dominant. There are still many, many names, yet some names are already entered into the books of those that are dead. So not only do we have those same sorts of humans that you might be comfortable understanding and drawing inspiration from, humans from Africa or Asia, even into the Middle East or India or Europe or the Americas before they are what they are now. Imagine all these sorts of people, but put in different roles, put in different positions, put in different places about the world, and perhaps coming out quite a bit differently than what we would think of them as. For after all, environment has a great deal to say about what one becomes and what one is. And these environments are very, very different. And there's a great deal of outside opposition to be put upon humanity. And humanity, after all, worships or was created by a god of conquest to go forward and populate the world, to champion the growth of cities, to grow and to grow and to grow. Now, the rules of Nathraxu state that a species may only be made for one cycle for 77 days, from day 1 to day 77. That is it. And the divinity may no longer create that species. Think about a mold being made and broken and cast away, never to be used again. And if that species is eradicated, so be it. The divinity, if they wish to start again, must do so. And it takes a tremendous amount of strength and resources from a divinity to create a species. Yet Pelgin did just such a thing. Looking at the many, many, many species that had come before, he had ideas and blueprints, saw what he thought worked and what did not. And what he thought was he needed the species that was more adaptable than any other, that could be in any environment, that could stand any test, that could have a mind that was not rigid, but flexible and fluid. And in that, Pelgin has already begun to see a tremendous diversity of human ideology that has come spinning from those first days of primal destruction, trickery, and barbarism to a species that is quite quickly developing a society upon society the world over, and integrating new ideas and having new takes and having different relationships with the divinity, because on each day that Pelgin made them, he infused essence of the divinity of that day into his people to make sure that each one was different from the other, so that he might come up with a recipe that made for the perfect human being. And they look different. And they are different in the way they think. What is a person? The slightest touch of Erema, the primal annihilation, living darkness. How are they different from a human with a touch, the Hormazda of daylight, of a liquid gold soul? These are different things than a human made with a touch of wind, or fire, or water from the Red River. And it was from that same Red River that when Pelgin wished to make his own species, he spoke with his friend, fellow god Dingan. Dingan, the god of the Red River, said, "Take from my body, Pelgin, take that clay that is my flesh and make your species." And Dingan has always been thought of since as the uncle of humanity, and looked kindly upon them, and had his children, the dolphins, aid on many times and many occasions for those lost upon the water. On each day, Pelgin scooped up handfuls of clay and made them into human. And as he made that clay, he looked down at it, fashioning it, sculpting it in a beautiful form, breathing life into his creation and making his creation look different one to the next. And as I said, there are humans that look like what we would call humans, and there are humans with blue skin and red skin, and I don't mean that in a Native American way. I mean that in red. People who are different, beyond what we would call human, yet they are. And many of these are very rare and perhaps would even die out. There are those humans who have died out. And on each of these days, Pelgin made, well, on the first day, Pelgin makes a steak. But on day 2 to day 77, Pelgin makes a tribe, and of each of these tribes, he makes 1 man and 7 women, and such has become the norm of humans. Humans are created by God of masculinity and have a patriarchal society. They have a tremendous amount of sexism, a tremendous, different sort of society than we might be used to. After all, you must remember, the world is very, very different from Earth. And Pelgin has laws in place, much like each of the divinities. And on these first days, 7 women were made for each man. And it is the custom of humans that more females are born than males. And many, many powerful men have many, many, many wives, as many wives as they wish to have. Perhaps concubines besides those. These men who began the families, their names live on, have become surnames to those who have come from them. These names, many of them elicit feelings of awe or terror, depending on the deeds of that individual. Now, the first individuals that were made when Pelgin made them from that clay, they were then as they are now. They do not age. They cannot succumb to disease or poison. They are ageless. They may appear as if they were a 14-year-old or an 85-year-old, depending on how Pelgin made them, or depending on what his want and design with that clay flesh was at that time. And clay man is, of course, a slur used by many species that detest humans about the world for knowing their origin stories. As every species was made from one thing or another, and thus is the way that humans were made. And now, in these days, humanity already rises to some degree of note, building cities and forging relationships with the species close to them. Always, always thinking ahead, always thinking what best way to leverage their position. Humanity, Ecology, are not the classic good guys that you see in game after game after game, in fantasy world after fantasy world after fantasy world. Humans, Ecology, are exactly what they would be if they were created with nothing and had to do anything they could to survive in a world that is predatory and harsh. Humanity continues to thrive, continues to increase its population, continues to build cities and take cities that were owned by others. Many in this world hate humanity, and rightfully so. But then again, how relevant are their feelings anyway?